All right, thanks for joining us today, everyone, for our webinar about funding your graduate education and understanding the costs and learning to help put together a budget. My name is Carrie Huber, and I'm the Manager of Graduate Marketing and Recruitment here in Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs at the University of Waterloo. So now, before we get started, I'd just like to recognize that the University of Waterloo acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldeman Tract, which is the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is coordinated within the Office of Indigenous Relations. So the photo see here on the right is a brand new Indigenous outdoor gathering space that we just opened on campus. This is something that we do take very seriously here at the University of Waterloo, always trying to incorporate Indigenous initiatives and ways of learning and working into how we operate. So this new gathering space is a representation of the continuous presence of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit on this territory. And it also provides an outdoor classroom setting for educating on First Nations, Métis, and Inuit content, and is also a space for campus communities to gather and sit freely when the space is not in use for events and classes. So if you are on campus, you will be able to check this out. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. So it is this presentation style, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. We are recording this, and anyone who is registered, you'll get an email with a link to the recording a couple days after the webinar. If you do have questions, especially for the end part, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You'll be able to see what questions other folks are asking, and you can upvote the questions as well. My colleague Jason Santo, also from Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs, is in the background and will be answering some of your questions as we go, and will also be helping with the Q&A at the end. So you may see some answers pop up during the webinar as well. Now, if we don't know the answer, depending on what your question is, we do have your email address and we'll be able to connect that to your question, and then we can follow up with you by email. We can consult some of our funding and scholarship experts and then get back to you if we don't know the answer. And Jason will also be adding any links that I mention to the chat. So what we'll cover today, we'll go over some of the different types of grad programs we offer here at Waterloo. We'll talk about funding options according to the grad programs, talk a bit about what minimum funding is. We'll go over some scholarships and awards that are available. We'll also talk about our options for international students. I know we have a lot of international students joining us today. We'll cover a bit about tuition and fees, and then some other costs to consider for grad school here in Waterloo. So starting off with the types of graduate programs that we offer here. So we have research-based graduate programs, and then we have course-based graduate programs. So we'll start off talking a bit about our research-based programs and specifically our master's-based programs or master's programs. So research-based master's programs, you can tell if it's research-based if you are visiting the program page for your specific program, which you can find from our future graduate students website in the listing of all of the programs, and then you click on the specific program. On the right-hand side, you'll see a study option section. And where it says study option, a research program will say it'll have an option of thesis or master's research paper. And then for PhD programs, it will say thesis as well. So thesis is the exclusive study option for our PhD programs. Now, for our research-based programs, you will do some coursework, but they're primarily independent research where you'll be working with a supervisor. Of course, for a PhD program, there's a lot more of that independent research, and sometimes it's continuing that research that you started in your master's program. But often there is some coursework as well. So again, our master's research-based programs and then our PhD programs are what encompass our research-based programs here. And then we also offer course-based programs. So these are at the master's level only, and these will be primarily focused on coursework. So well, you may have some papers to write and some research to do. It won't be to the same level as with a research-based master's program, and will primarily be coursework based. So some of our coursework-based master's programs are on campus, where all your classes will be here on campus at Waterloo or one of our satellite campuses. But some of our course-based programs are exclusively online, and some may have a short in-person component, and then you'll complete the rest online. Some of our course-based programs are full-time, and some are also designed to be completed part-time. So if you're a working professional or you have a job, you can complete a master's program while you're working. And also just to mention for our research-based programs, those are often completed full-time, but there are part-time options for our research-based programs as well. Some of that will affect your funding options, which we will talk about shortly. So now we'll touch on some of the funding options based on the type of program that you choose. So if you're in a research-based program, so specifically for our master's programs, but this will apply to our PhD programs as well, we have something called minimum funding, which is the minimum amount of funding you will get over the course of completing your degree. So for a master's program, for some of our research-based master's programs, the recommended minimum funding is $12,000 for the first year of the program only. Now, again, this is not for all of our master's research programs. A lot of them do have this, but it's important to check with your program to see if this is offered or not. So that minimum funding, it can come from a few different sources. So minimum funding can come from teaching assistantships or research assistantships. So where you're doing work and you're being a TA or an RA included as part of that funding, or it can also be through awards and scholarships. So some of those awards and scholarships are internal, awarded from the University of Waterloo, and many of these actually don't need an application. So a lot of the internal awards and scholarships you're automatically considered for based on academic merit or other award specific criteria. So at the time of application and when you're given an offer of admission, any of those automatic internal awards or scholarships will be shown in your offer of admission. And for master's programs, and PhD programs, there are external awards you can apply to as well. These are ones that are awarded outside of the University of Waterloo, coming from places like the federal government. For example, the federal tri-agencies. There's the Canada Graduate Scholarship for master's programs. And for PhD programs, you have the NSERC and the SHRC and the CHIR awards, as well as the Vanier Canada Graduate Scholarships. And there's also Ontario Graduate Scholarships. That's a provincial one that are available to both master's and PhD students. So I won't go into too much detail on those because there's a lot of information on those on our websites, and it'll have all of the award criteria and application information on those awards. But those external awards, they're often very prestigious. And again, they're not awarded by the University of Waterloo. And when you hold some of those prestigious external awards, you're often also awarded a President's Graduate Scholarship as well from the University of Waterloo to top up that funding as well. Other thing to note, so I was just talking about minimum funding. Many departments actually offer more than the minimum funding. For PhD programs, to mention, the minimum funding is $27,000 per year. So that's $27,000 each year of your program for 4 years. You do have to be a full-time PhD student and in good academic standing to receive that minimum funding. Um, and this minimum funding for PhD students is actually reviewed annually. So if the amount does increase, you are eligible for that increase in the following year. So right now it's around $27,000 a year. And then if there were to be an increase in subsequent years, you would be eligible for that as well. And again, that's for all PhD students, that minimum funding, and for the first 4 years, as long as you're a full-time student. Um, and for master's research-based programs that do offer the minimum funding, you also need to be a full-time student as well. And many departments do offer more than the minimum funding. So again, that is the minimum. Some programs and departments offer more, and that's something that you would check in with your program about, and they'll have more information on. Now, also important to mention as we talk about minimum funding is meant to be support and is not meant to cover all of your non-tuition expenses. So for PhD programs, especially, it will cover your tuition and fees, and there will often be some left over, but it is not meant to cover all of your expenses. So just something to keep in mind. Um, Now, minimum funding, the way it's paid, I did mention that minimum funding can be made up of scholarship and awards as well as teaching assistantship and research assistantships. So those are actually paid out to you differently. So if you get one of those internal awards or scholarships that are automatically awarded that you get in your offer of admission letter, um, those ones are applied to your student account on a termly basis. So here at Waterloo, we have 3 terms in a year. So if you were to get a scholarship, they would be divided up for the year and then applied on a termly basis. And then if you were to get a TA ship or an RA ship, those are paid monthly, like payroll directly to your bank account. So those can all make up your minimum funding, but they're just paid to you in slightly different ways. So now for our course-based programs. Funding works a little bit differently for course-based programs. They are typically self-funded, so that means you would be paying for the costs of the program yourself out of pocket. Minimum funding does not apply to course-based programs. Um, but to that end, some course-based programs do offer entrance awards that are based on academic merit or achievement. An example, and I'll get Jason to pop this in the chat, is our MBET program. That's the Masters of Business, Entrepreneurship, and Technology, which is part of our Conrad School. They actually offer a number of different entrance scholarships. And again, these are ones that would be you'd be automatically considered for based on academic merit and other award criteria. And so some course-based master's programs do offer this as well. And it's something to either check in our awards database, so you can explore the graduate funding and awards database. This goes for both our research-based programs and course-based programs. You can check out all of the different awards and scholarships that are available there. So yeah, course-based programs, again, not eligible for minimum funding, but there are some that do have some small entrance scholarships as well. And those are typically also only available to full-time students and typically not for part-time. So also just want to touch briefly on some options for our international students. So we were just talking about minimum funding. So I want to note that minimum funding does also apply to international students. Of course, as long as you meet those requirements, being a full-time student and a good academic standing. Um, and it is a little bit different, as I was mentioning, for master's and PhD students. Um, so international master's students can be eligible for the International Master's Awards of Excellence. This is also for research-based programs only, and it's not a guaranteed award. It's something that if your department is able to offer it to you, it would show up in your offer of admission letter with your funding details. But international master's students could also apply for the Ontario Graduate Scholarship or the Vanier Canada Graduate Scholarship. And there's a couple other options there as well. So that's something you can explore in the Graduate Awards database. Now, for our international PhD students, all international PhD students are eligible for the International Doctoral Student Award. And this award makes up approximately, or the value is approximately the difference between full-time domestic PhD tuition and full-time international PhD tuition. So this would be an award that international PhD students would be eligible for that would help make up your minimum funding. Something else to consider is international agreements and sponsorships. So these are formal agreements that are preset with governments and institutions abroad that offer scholarships and funding and sometimes loans, depending. Some of them are program dependent. But we'll pop that link in the chat as well, and you can see if potentially in your country if there are any international agreements that exist, because those are an option for funding as well. So something else just to know briefly for our international students is about financial requirements to obtain a study permit. So there have always been financial requirements to obtain a study permit. But recently, the government in Canada, or the government of Canada, sorry, has increased these just to reflect the increased cost of living and changes in, again, expenses and cost of living here in Canada. So you must be able to demonstrate that you can cover your first year of tuition plus an additional $20,635. And that amount does change if you are bringing in family members, as you can see here in the chart. So just want to highlight this as something to keep in mind as you're going through the process. But also want to say that it's really important just to focus on getting an offer of admission first. So don't worry too much about this. Again, something to keep in mind, but worry about doing your application, getting your offer of admission, and then there are immigration consultants and other supports who are available to assist you after you are accepted. But just wanted to draw some attention to this as well. So both for domestic and international students, there are some other options along the lines of loans and other financing. So most of our graduate programs are eligible for funding from the Ontario Student Assistance Program, or OSAP. This is a provincial government funded program. It's available to all Ontario residents, and it includes provincial grants and loans of varying amounts to support your education. So this is for students who are residents of Ontario. And for domestic students from other provinces, most other provinces in Canada also have student loan programs available as well. Now, for international students, there is a company called Empower Financing. They're a public benefit corporation that offers student loans to students who typically can't qualify for a loan from other banks or lenders unless they have a cosigner or collateral. So this can be a really good option if you're an international student. They're a well-respected company and provide low interest loans and other options, other financing options for you. So worth looking into for international students. Another option can also be private bank loans or student lines of credit. This will be primarily for our domestic students, so students who are in Ontario or coming from other places in Canada. Many banks do offer special lines of credit exclusively for students. There are a couple of banks, I believe it's Scotiabank, that does offer some financing for international students, but it's a very specific program, and really only some international students can apply for this. So again, primarily for domestic students, but that's an option to consider as well. Now we do have there are some bursaries um, available once you are a student at Waterloo. So if you are accepted and are a student and there are potentially financial challenges, there are some bursaries that are available, but these aren't something that you should rely on as a source of funding, but we do have them there for emergencies. And there is more information on those on our website too if you want to check them out. So let's touch a little bit briefly here on tuition and fees. So tuition and fees, they're going to depend on the type of program that you're in and the type of student that you are. So type of program, that's going to be if you're in a research-based program, either a master's or PhD program, and then a course-based program, because those are going to have different tuition amounts depending on the program. And then also depending on the type of student you are. So if you're a domestic student or an international student. No, actually, within domestic students, that's broken down further. There's different tuition amounts for domestic students in Ontario and then domestic students who are out of province. So three different categories: international students, domestic out of province, and then domestic Ontario students. So to find this information, if you want to get an idea of what that looks like, you can start from our tuition and fees page, which will direct you to our finance website, where you'll see the grad tuition page, and then you'll choose your residency, again, one of those three that I just outlined. You'll choose the type of program that you're in, again, either research-based, master's or PhD, or a course-based program. And then you'll choose the term from the chart. So tuition amounts for future terms are posted approximately 2 months prior to the start of each term, so you can get an idea of what upcoming tuition costs are. And then after you've chosen your term, then you'll find your program underneath the appropriate faculty, and then your tuition amount will be displayed there. The finance website also has a tuition fee estimator tool you can use. So this is handy if you're applying for a study permit and need to pay fees in advance to show proof of payment for application. Or if you're applying for an education student loan, as we were mentioning, OSAP, or another type of loan or a loan from the bank. Using this tuition fee estimator can be a good way to show what tuition costs will be. So just a note about tuition. Again, I mentioned before that and how and when tuition fees are charged. So at the University of Waterloo, our academic year is divided into 3 terms, and tuition fees are charged on a per term basis. So in your student account, each term, about 1 month before the start of classes, your tuition will appear. And then if you have scholarships or internal awards, again, those are the ones that I was mentioning earlier that will show on your offer of admission letter. Those ones are applied to your student account and then applied to your tuition and fees first. And then if there is any credit remaining, you'll be issued a refund. So that's sort of how that works. Your tuition is posted, and then scholarships and awards are applied to the tuition and fees first, and then any remaining amount is issued to you as a refund. And then, of course, if you do have the funds coming to you from a TA ship or an RA ship, again, those ones are paid on a monthly basis and will be a direct deposit to your bank account. So we want to touch briefly on some other costs to consider as you're thinking about sort of what the whole picture looks like for your graduate school costs. So, of course, you also have to consider housing and living costs. So here at the University of Waterloo, we do have on-campus housing available for graduate students, but it is a limited amount. So we do encourage you, if you are going to be wanting on-campus housing, that once you receive that offer of admission, you apply for on-campus housing as soon as you're able to when that application opens. So that's typically in late March that our on-campus housing applications open. So then it can make sure those are offered on a first come first serve basis. So you can get in line as early as possible. Then those offers usually start going out in the month or two after that application deadline. So on-campus housing is an option, but if on-campus housing doesn't work or you just prefer to live off campus, there are various factors that will affect the cost. So some of those are, of course, how close you are to the university. So there are a lot of student accommodations and accommodations geared to students around the university. Some of those will tend to be a little bit more expensive if they're closer to the university. Of course, the further you get out, it will start to be it can be a little bit less expensive, again, depending on the neighborhood you're in, as well as how close you are to public transit. So we do have a rapid transit LRT line, and sometimes apartments that are closer to that can be a little bit more expensive. But the further out you go, sometimes they can also be more affordable as well. And then you're still close to transit to be able to get to the university. Um, and also your style of living can affect your costs. So if you're choosing to live alone in a condo type apartment, or if you're in a shared housing situation, those will all affect the cost of your monthly rent. So we do have a living costs and housing page that has a chart that just details some of those expenses, those living expenses, and gives you some ideas and other resources to consider. Of course, there's things to think about like your monthly grocery budget, telephone bill, clothing, other utilities, depending on what's included or not in your rent. Um, and all the amounts there we have are just sort of a basis for suggestion. They are really going to depend on what your personal preferences are, and you'll know, sort of depending how much you want to allocate for entertainment budget and that kind of thing. But it's a good starting place and also gives you some additional costs to consider that could be one-time costs, like purchasing winter boots and coats. If you're joining us from a country where you maybe wouldn't need those, those are additional costs that you will want to consider. So that living cost and housing page is a great place to start, just to get an idea of what else you might need to consider. And again, we do just want to reiterate that while we do provide that minimum funding, especially for our PhD students, it can't. You need to make sure you do have some other funds as well, as it probably won't be able to cover all of your living costs. So, just important to sort of consider that full picture and all the aspects as you're thinking about putting together your budget. So I think now we will move into our Q&A session. So, Jason, if you want to just pop back on screen.
Hello, everyone. We've had some really great questions coming through in the Q&A throughout the session. So maybe since there's no currently open questions, I'll start just by recapping some of the questions that have come in. Do feel free in the remaining time that we have to enter any new questions into the Q&A module, and I'll answer them live. So the first question that we received, Carrie, was, are there fully online master's programs or does it depend on course availability? I responded by indicating that most of our online programs do have some in-person component, typically some time at the beginning or the end of a program, and that you would need to kind of look at the individual online offerings to find out more how that works for the specific program. Interestingly, Carrie is not only part of the graduate studies team, but she's also a master's student herself, and she is currently working on an online program. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about how that works for your program.
Yeah, sure, Jason. So, yes, so my program, I'm taking the Master of Future Cities program, and it is advertised as an online program. So most of our courses are online, except at the beginning of the program. So I just started this fall. In August, we were on campus for a week for an on-campus intensive, and many of our online programs operate this way as well. So there's either a week or 2 week long on-campus intensive where you meet your classmates, you take a course. Again, it is called an intensive, so there's lots of work in that time. But then you're not expected to be on campus after that until potentially the very end of your program. So many of these course-based programs do have a capstone project where they do prefer that you be in person. Sometimes it's just for a day or two to be able to present your capstone project at the end. And I do know a lot of our online programs are like that. You come for an on-campus intensive at the beginning, all your courses are online, and then you come again for the end for your capstone presentation. But not all online programs are exactly like that. Some may not have a capstone in-person presentation. Um, some may have a shorter or longer on-campus intensive. It can just depend, but that's sort of typically what it looks like.
Great. Okay, so now we've got quite a few new questions coming in. There's a good question about academic standing. I'm just getting some information, so I'll come back to that. I'll maybe move on to the next open question here. I've emailed a couple supervisors after submitting my PhD application, but none of them have responded. How do I sort this situation out? Um, that's a that can be a challenge. I think it's more than fair to say that the process of sort of matchmaking to find a supervisory fit for a research-based program is maybe one of the more complicated and sometimes challenging aspects of applying to a research-based program at Waterloo or frankly at any other university. Some advice that I could offer, reach out to the graduate program, reach out to the graduate coordinator for the program that you're interested in to see if they have any networking events, virtual or otherwise, that you might be able to participate in. Open houses are sometimes a great opportunity for that. Another thing that you can consider doing is look to see if there are research talks that are being produced by the faculty, the department, or school. Those are often a great way to connect with the research community within that faculty or academic unit and begin to make those connections. Another possible avenue for you to explore on this is to maybe try to network and connect to alumni from that program to see if they're able to maybe provide some advice to you. I think the reality is that there isn't always a perfect match between the demand of individuals who are interested in doing research programs in a particular unit here at Waterloo and the availability of research supervisors as well. So an alternative to this would be considering perhaps other programs that could get you here so that you're able to create those relationships and build those networks and then kind of go from there. So I don't know if it's not a perfect answer. It's a tricky situation, but that those are some of the advice that I would give to you. Just grabbing details here. We had a question about um, what does it mean if you say being in good academic standing? I'm just going to drop a link into the chat here to our graduate studies calendar that talks all about academic progression, how we grade in grades. And good academic standing is essentially related to your grades, and you can learn more about what that means in the academic calendar there. Next question, not related, but how long does it take for decisions to be made on applications after the application deadline? Generally speaking, we're trying to make application decisions as quickly as possible after the application deadline. I would say in this year in particular, with as a result of the many changes to immigration policy for international students, we're going to do our best to expedite those decisions as quickly as possible. Again, for the specific program that you're applying to, it's worth reaching out to that graduate coordinator to get a better sense of what their timeline looks like for that particular program. I just want to note that it is after 12. I'm happy to continue responding to these questions, but just wanted to kind of flag that for anybody else who has time considerations here. The next question is, do I have to look for an academic supervisor to qualify for graduate assistantship? Um,
Well, typically, like TAs and RAs would be assigned by your department and your
yes.
program. So it depends. In course-based programs, you typically TA and RA ships are not part of course-based programs. So if you're in a research-based program, you will have a supervisor, and then it's TA ships and RA ships are organized through your department.
Yeah. So generally speaking, step one, secure that academic supervisor, get accepted into that program, and then opportunities for research or teaching assistantships. There are a few programs that do a few course-based programs that may have teaching assistantships available. So it's not a full stop, but Carrie's absolutely right. Generally speaking, those are for our research-based master's students.
I
When
just
should
wanted to
we?
jump in with a quick note just before you go on to the next one.
Yeah,
About oh wait, sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. You keep going. And
that's okay. I'm sure it'll come back.
yeah, it will.
The next question is when should we expect offer letters after applications are sent for a master's program? Sometime after the application deadline for the program. So 9 times out of 10, applications aren't being reviewed for final decisions until around that deadline.
I remembered.
Yes, go ahead.
Jason, you were mentioning about, making sure that you secure a supervisor before you apply. Some of that is also very program dependent. Of course, for our course-based master's programs, not a requirement. Research-based programs, often yes, but not all of them. So you really have to look at the program page, look at the academic calendar, check the details on the program's website, follow up with the program coordinator if necessary. Because many of our programs actually you don't need a supervisor ahead of time. Some of them you do, some of them you don't. We just can't always say definitively which ones those are because it depends on the program. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that point. And I think that's really pertinent to everything that we've been talking about. It's difficult to sort of talk about these things in terms of generalizations because there's a lot of nuance between programs and units. So when in doubt, look at those programs that you're interested in and get those details there. Carrie, question here about funding opportunities for part-time PhDs. I feel like you touched on this a
Yeah,
bit.
unfortunately, minimum funding, part-time PhD students are not eligible for minimum funding. That it's just that's just how I think it is probably like that in most institutions as well, though I can't confirm. But funding is for full-time PhD students.
Great question here. Carrie, I think I'm going to maybe have you weigh in on this just as a current online student, but for online programs, do you have direct contact with the teachers or supervisors? Are there live classes or is it just videos or self-paced courses? So I think what we're talking here about is synchronous versus asynchronous delivery of courses.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's a mixture. As I said, like if your program does have if it's an online program and it has the on-campus intensive, then yes, you will. Um, and I know in this program that I'm taking, some of the courses are synchronous, so we have a certain time every week. The course I'm in now happens to be Wednesday evenings, but then there are other courses that are not synchronous, so the material is delivered on your own time. So it's a mixture. Obviously, if you're in an on-campus program, course-based program, then you are going to be coming in and your classes will be synchronous. But for the online programs, it's a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous.
Synchronous, asynchronous, and I would even say sometimes hybrid.
Yep.
Have some modules that you're doing entirely self-directed and then coming together for a lecture or something like that. Do international study visas have a limit on to the amount of hours that you can work per week as a student? Yes, they do. The current limit is 20 hours. Bear with me, because this just changed recently with the immigration changes that we've been mentioning. Up to 20 hours per week off campus. So yeah, that was recently reduced. So yes, you can work up to 20 hours off campus. It's worth mentioning for a recent change for international applicants who may be coming with their spouses, that their spouses will no longer be eligible to work while they're here initially. Question for PhDs, do we have similar programs with intensive campus and then online? That's a good question. I think, again, this is going to really depend on the program. I know that there are programs that are very seminar intensive. Um, and there may be course offerings that you can take as to fulfill your PhD degree requirements that are online. But again, I think that can vary significantly from one department or unit to another. Um, so the answer to that question is possibly. Take a look at the programs that you're interested in, and when in doubt, reach out to those individual units to get more details about the format and delivery.
And also just to clarify, when I was talking about the on-campus intensive and then online courses, that's for course-based master's programs.
Yeah.
Again, so PhD programs, yes, there will be courses. Some may be online, in person, seminar, and then a lot of it will be independent research.
All right, next question. Do I have to apply for the funding or am I considered automatically once I'm considered for admission? So many of the awards are entrance awards that are you're automatically considered for by the unit that you're applying to. Some of them do require an additional application. In those cases, typically you're looking to be admitted first. So really important point to talk about with regards to funding for graduate school. We understand that how you're going to pay for school and how you're going to pay for life while you're with us is a really important concern. But it's important to focus on gaining admission first, and then we'll work with you to kind of figure out some solutions around funding. Oftentimes, awards that require applications, our students are typically not in a position to apply for them at the same time that they're applying for admission. So focus on getting admitted first, and then there's lots of options for you to explore once you get here. Where can you find a recording of this? We're going to post it on YouTube. Yes, Carrie?
Yeah, and if you've registered, you'll get an email not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow with a recording.
All right. Got a question here about wanting to apply to a master's of possibly some kind of Master's of Science. I'm going to take the GRE exam. Can I submit my score as an admission chance booster since it's not required? Additionally, should I secure a supervisor prior to my application? Um, Generally speaking, there's no harm in including additional information about your profile in your application. You might not need to necessarily submit that score separately because if the applications are individualized, so there may not even be a field for it in the application if your program doesn't require it. However, typically you're providing a CV or some kind of supplementary information form, or what's typically referred to as a letter of intent, and that might be another opportunity to kind of mention those points. Just want to reiterate, we kind of talked a bit before about supervisors. Check out the specific programs that you're interested in. Some may require that you secure that supervisor before you apply. Some programs and units might provide more of a facilitative role in helping connect you to a supervisor. Is there a way to be considered for an application fee waiver? At this time, the only applicants who are eligible for an application fee waiver are Indigenous students, First Nations students within Canada. For international students, do we need to have the visa or application acceptance notification in order to know what to do first and with time? So you need to have an offer of admission in order to initiate your student permit application. So again, step one is applying and being successful in getting an offer of admission. And at that point, and even before that point, once you start your application and pay your application fee, I want to encourage you to avail yourself of our immigration consulting services at Waterloo, and they'll be able to answer these types of questions in more detail. General differences between course-based and research-based programs. Course load, time spent in research versus coursework, like assignments, exams, and that kind of thing. Seminars are often another component. A bit more of a predictable schedule with a course-based program. You might run into more group work in a course-based program than a research-based program. But again, it's really difficult to speak in generalities there. So take a look at the programs that you're looking at in more detail. And you can even go into the graduate studies calendar to see all the individual course requirements for that program. That can be a good way to get a better sense of what the experience will be like.
Yeah, great point, Jason. The
Question.
academic calendar.
Yes. If you, and you know what, I'll put that link in.
Now, so this next question is, if you already secured a supervisor, is it still a good idea to apply to multiple programs? I would say probably not. Like if
I
you
would
ha
say probably not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like if you have a supervisor, you know, and like they know what program you're coming into, so they want you to be there. So if you have a supervisor already, I would say that you want to be sticking to that program, unless they've told you to apply to other ones.
Yeah, I think the risk here is that it might suggest that you're not as focused on the research area and subject matters you may have initially presented yourself to that supervisor. And so that might create a bit of a lack of confidence. So yeah, talk to the supervisor about this is a good piece of advice, Carrie. Does minimum funding for PhD cover the Canada's minimum annual income for international students? So this individual, you are referring to the amount of money that you need to demonstrate that you have as part of the study permit application process. Um, the answer to that is maybe. The reality is that minimum funding can be comprised of a variety of different sources and may be granted to you as a student at different times. The financial resources that you need to be able to prove for your study permit application are really what you have available at the time that you are coming into the program. So every student permit application is unique. And while it might seem like there are sort of standardized processes, they're not. They're all treated quite uniquely. You may be required to provide additional documentation about funding, including a copy of your offer letter that might speak to minimum funding. But it really depends on the program, again, unfortunately. And also whether you're coming by yourself or whether you're coming with a family, because if you're coming with dependents, then the amount of funding that you need to demonstrate that you have available to you is even higher. Again, we're getting into the territory of something that Carrie and I are really not in the best position to provide you advice on. This is something we really want you to talk to our immigration consultants about to get the details that you need.
Which you can do after you have an offer of admission. So once you have an offer of admission, you're able to speak with our immigration consultants, and they can help
Actually,
you.
you can the second you pay your application fee and you're an applicant, you can access them.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so you don't even need to be have an offer from Waterloo. If you've started your application, they have you can make an appointment. They have a variety of ways that you can reach out to them. I'll just make sure that I get a link for that into the chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason. While
No.
you're doing that, I'll just touch on the next question. Can an international master student be offered an online hybrid program? Yes. Um, you in some ways, I have actually I don't know how that affects immigration study permit, but yes, those are our online programs are open to international students as well.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work either. If you have an in-person component, you might be applying for a visitor's permit to come for that in-person component, but not actually a study permit for an international program. An important consideration there is time difference, whether or not you want to be attending, live lectures at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, depend on your location. I speak from experience just during COVID, when we had some international students were sort of stuck in various places and participating in courses online, and that did become a bit of a scheduling challenge. So that's just something to consider. And our last question here, extending the question about study visa working hours if you have time. If it's limited to 20 hours a week off campus, that wouldn't include TA RA. That is correct. All right,
Perfect. All right.
great.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks to Jason for helping answer all those questions and getting everyone the links. And if you do have further questions, please send me an email. My email address is up there, and I'll do my best to answer or find someone who can answer them for you. And otherwise, thanks for coming today, and we wish you the best of luck in your application process. Goodbye.
Take care, everybody.